It's my pleasure today to be speaking with Susie Jones. She is the retired band director from Mount Hood Community College, an amazing saxophonist, and also a fellow scuba diver. Susie, thank you for being here with me.
I am honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
And also just one moment. We got to turn this one off. Susie, thank you for being here with me.
I am honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
And also just one moment. There, sorry, we had a little delay there.
Sure.
Well, before we start talking about your musical career, let's talk about my passion as well, scuba diving. Where did you learn how to dive?
You know, I didn't learn how to dive until I entered into retirement. Decided it was something I wanted to learn how to do. And so my husband and I did that. We took the pool class and the bookwork through Mount Hood Community College, and then we did our open water dive at Hood Canal in December.
That's when I did mine as well. It was rather cold, and that's why I always like diving in warm weather.
Yeah, I'm not doing any more cold water diving. It wasn't fun. Why would you do that when you can do warm water diving?
So what's the coolest thing you've ever seen while diving?
Oh my gosh. So many things, you know, rays, turtles, just you name it.
Well, before we start, I'd just like to say, if you are watching live, if you do have a question for Susie, please post that comment and I'll make sure that I ask it to her. You grew up in Lebanon. Did you have a lot of musical influences in your family while growing up?
I did. My mother was very musical. My older brothers and sister played musical instrument, and my grandfather was very musical. He played saxophone in a dance band during the Depression. He also ended up getting into barbershop music and was really a pioneer in barbershop choruses and quartets. He was an arranger. And a director of barbershop choruses.
Is that why you picked the saxophone, because of your grandfather?
I started on flute, and somebody decided that I also needed to play saxophone. I really didn't know why. But in middle school, I added saxophone, and he pushed me a little bit on that one.
And so high school saxophone, who was your high school band director?
My high school band director was an all-star. His name is Mel Knight, and he was an amazing person and teacher, and inspired so many young people, not just in music, but just in how to conduct their life. He was great.
Well, what set him apart from other teachers that you had in high school?
He was cool. He was so cool. You know, he would walk down the hall and he would throw his keys up and catch them behind his back. You know, and he was fun in class. He was funny. He was, of course, a very good musician, very good teacher, but he was really cool.
So you played sax in the jazz band, and did you play flute in the concert band?
Well, interesting, at Lebanon at that time, you did not have to be in concert band to be in the jazz band. I only played in jazz band. I kind of regret that, except that I was also taking some classes like physics and some other classes, and it was a little hard to fit everything into my schedule. So, yeah.
Well, back in that time when both you and I were going to high school, there wasn't a lot of jazz charts really out there like there are now. So what did your director do to get you that jazz experience?
Right. And, you know, I didn't know that this was unusual until much later. But as you said, those big band charts weren't available. They weren't published. You couldn't get them from Buddy Rich or Stan Kenton or whoever. My high school band director transcribed charts for us. So we had the professional charts that we were playing. I thought that was just normal. When I went to college, I started transcribing charts too, you know. And that's
what's one of the charts that you remember from your high school days?
Oh gosh. Well, we did one. It was the Mike Heathman arrangement of Bill Bailey, which was mostly a sax solo. It was faster than you know what, and it was a finger buster, and it was really a lot of fun to play and work up. So I remember that one quite well. He did some transcriptions of Don Ellis. I think there was one called Salvador Sam from Don Ellis, and some others. Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of a transcript, trying to do a transcription of Don Ellis. That must have been really challenging.
Yeah, no kidding.
So while in high school and you had success in being in jazz band, when you decided to leave high school and go into college, did you think you were going to be majoring in music, or what prompted you to go to Mount Hood Community College, where you first went to?
I didn't really think it was a good idea to major in music in college, but I did choose Mount Hood partly because of the music program. So my thinking was that I could take classes at Mount Hood and try to figure out what I wanted to do because I really had no clue. And at the same time, I could still stay involved in music. Well, as it turned out, the program at Mount Hood was so phenomenal that I just got sucked in, and pretty soon that's all I wanted to do. I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, and that program was really in its heyday, and that's with the director Larry Mcveigh.
Yeah.
Who was well known throughout the country for
Yes.
composers, band leaders would call him up and say, I need a saxophone player. Who do you have?
Yes. And they would jump directly from the program at Mount Hood and head out on the road with one of the big bands, with Woody Herman, Stan Kenton, Buddy Rich, Maynard Ferguson. That was kind of ending when I went to Mount Hood. I think the last person to get called up to go play with Stan Kenton was Jeff Usatello. So my first term at Mount Hood, Jeff was still there, and then he was gone after that.
Yeah, and Jeff was a trombone player, and still,
right.
Is he still in the Portland area?
Yes, he is.
So what was it like to be playing in this amazing jazz band? And I actually did a little search on YouTube and listened to some of the jazz bands from Mount Hood Community College at that time when you were there, and they were phenomenal. So what was it like being in that jazz program?
Well, yes, they were phenomenal. And actually, I didn't make it into the top band for a couple of years. I was in the second band, which was still a pretty good band. So, for instance, Phil Baker, jazz bass player in Portland area, he started out in the second jazz band at Mount Hood, didn't make the first band his first year. So that's kind of the quality of players that we had there. It was competitive but friendly there. Students, cooperated with each other. It was interesting because the practice rooms were always full, and the students would get to know the public safety officers. And when the public safety officers would come around at 10 o'clock at night to lock down the building, the students would hide in the practice rooms with the lights off and wait for them to leave. And then after the public safety officers left, they stayed, and they might stay until 2 a.m. and practice. But that's the kind of atmosphere it was there. There were no shortcuts to becoming proficient on your instrument. It was hard work.
And that's something, the culture that Larry really cultivated.
Yes.
And so with that in mind, what was it like to be working with or under Larry Mcveigh?
He was crazy, crazy guy. It's interesting, in his ensemble classes, it didn't seem like he was teaching, but it seemed like he was creating an environment at a very high expectation, and students just knew that they had to have their stuff together when they came in. When they walked in the door, they better have it together, and they figured out how to do it. He was also an amazing recruiter. And there's a story that Dave Vardoon tells that when Dave was a senior in high school up in Washington, Larry Mcveigh called the school and said it was a family emergency and got Dave out of class and said, Dave, are you coming to Mount Hood? That's the kind of recruiter he was.
Well, it seemed to work really well because it seemed like Mount Hood always had this wealth of great musicians coming through that program.
Yeah. Yep.
So what's if I ask you what's one important thing that you learned from Larry Mcveigh that helped you with your jazz career, what would it be?
I guess it is that if you want to write and arrange, it's helpful to transcribe first and to really to get inside the music and to know it, I guess.
Yeah, I see a lot of high school directors have come along with that too, with jazz, and I did a little bit of that too when I was at Lake Oswego. It's just a whole different type of process, thinking process for the students to actually get in there and do the transcription. Of course, this was before the internet, where now you can just go and see a score almost anywhere. Where
Right.
they did not have that option.
Yeah, it's different when you have to do it yourself. You learn it much better when you're doing the hard work. And remember back then, we were operating with vinyl records and cassette players,
Right.
And transcribing that way.
So after Mount Hood Community College, you have, I think this happened at this time. Did you take a summer off or summer work experience by being in the All-American Jazz Band at Disneyland?
Yes, the All-American College Marching Show Band at Disneyland. That was an amazing summer. I feel very fortunate that I got into that group. When we spent the whole summer down at Disneyland, first we had to learn the show. And then once we got past that part, there was a routine. And the routine was that in the morning, they would bus us to Disneyland and take us to what they called Disney University. And we had clinicians from the Los Angeles area come in and give us clinics about the entertainment industry. So we had Frank Comstock come in and talk about arranging and writing for TV shows. He's the guy who did the writing for the show Adam 12 and many, many others. We had Conti Condoli, who's a jazz trumpet player. He brought in a small group. We had Med Flory. He was the lead alto player with super sax. He came in. But then we also had choreographers and producers and people involved in the business of entertainment, and they all came in and they gave clinics to us in the morning. Then in the afternoon, we went out to various places in the park and did our shows. So one was at Tomorrowland Terrace, one was at New Orleans Square, and just various spots. And then we did one more show, which was the pre-parade. They were doing the electrical parade at night. And they found that people would line the streets well in advance to see the electrical parade. So they started running some entertainment down the street to entertain the people waiting to see the electrical parade. So that was our last gig of the day.
So I think the most fascinating part about that I didn't know about was I thought you just got together, got your routine, and you just performed all day long at Disneyland. I didn't realize that you had a chance to meet with some of the industry giants.
Oh, yeah. For me, that was probably the best part. The other thing that happened, though, was that in Carnation Plaza at that time, they had big bands every night. So when we finished our gig, we had the choice, if we wanted to, we could go back to Disneyland and go sit in front of those big bands. So they had Count Basie, they had Les Brown, they had all sorts of big bands coming through at that time. So we could watch that. And just being in Los Angeles, if you were over 21, which I was, then you could go to some clubs and hear some live jazz that way.
I saw a YouTube video with the Big Fat Band doing their.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Great video if you get a chance if you get a chance to watch that on YouTube, it's well worth it.
Yeah.
So before we go on, I have to ask, what's one thing you learned about Disneyland that you didn't know about before you got down there?
There's a whole bunch of things very interesting. I learned that there's a employee break room inside of the Matterhorn where they have a basketball court. Mm-hmm. I learned something about how they manipulate. I don't want to say manipulate. That's not a friendly word, but entertain their guests. So that they use something called forced perspective. So when you're on Main Street, as you're going into Disneyland, it looks like it's very big and very far away. But as you're coming out, it looks like you'll be out at the exit in no time because they have shorter trees, shorter this and that. So it's called forced perspective. They do stuff like that.
Well,
I also learned how long it would take them to recoup their investment on certain things. So when they built Space Mountain, it would take X number of years to actually get the money back from what they put into it. When they put in video games at Space Mountain, it took a week for them to pay themselves off.
So after that summer, then you went to the University of Portland, is that right?
Correct.
And so what did you do? What was your major at the University of Portland?
Well, by the time I got to University of Portland, now I was pretty focused. So now I knew it was music education, and I didn't fool around. I went straight through, got it done. And by the way, I student taught, by the way, with Ben Brooks.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was great.
And that was at Columbia High School?
Yep.
And after UP, you got your degree and you got your master's from there as well.
Correct.
And what did you get your master's in?
So after I got my bachelor's and my basic teaching certificate, I was out teaching, and I was doing summers at PSU to work on my standard teaching certificate, 5th year. And I just decided, I want to do something different. And so I decided to take a year's leave of absence from teaching. I got the graduate assistantship at University of Portland, so that paid my tuition. And I studied music composition. And I ended up getting a master's degree in music composition, studying with David Schiff at Reed College, who was one of the top students of Elliott Carter.
Mm-hmm. And after that, so you've got your master's, you got your composition. What happened after that? Where did you go after that?
Teach. And then family, it was a little hard to pursue music during those years where I was teaching and raising a family, as everyone knows, so my playing kind of went on the back burner, and my writing as well.
Well, where's your first teaching job?
That was in the North Clackamas School District. I was an itinerant music teacher teaching orchestra, and I taught in 5 buildings a day, orchestra.
Orchestra, 5 buildings a day.
Yes.
And so did you have very much experience with string instruments?
Nope. Very, very little. Coming from the small town that I came from, I didn't have much exposure to orchestra. Didn't really know anything about it until I played in the orchestra, played flute in the orchestra at Mount Hood Community College under Larry Zagans. Fell in love with literature, who wouldn't? And the opportunity came along for me to teach orchestra in North Clackamas. And I said to the guy who was basically hiring me, I said, I don't know how to teach strings. And he said, you'll learn. And I did, so I took violin lessons, took cello lessons, and I leaned heavily upon my concertmaster at the high school.
Right. And having Ben Brooks as your mentor teacher for student teacher, I'm sure that was a wealth of information as well.
Yes, that's right.
So you're at North Clackamas for about 9 years.
9 years, yep.
And then did you look to a different job, or were you recruited for your next position?
I was kind of recruited. It was the David Douglas School District. Mark Galkey was there and he said, I think this would be a good move for you. And I looked into it and made the jump, and it was a very good move. The David Douglas District has always strongly supported the arts and music, and it was a different vibe and opportunity going to Dave Douglas than what I had where I came from. So it was a very good move.
Now, Mark Galkey was a great trumpet player, and I know that you had played in a bunch of different bands through college and after college. What were some of the bands that you played in, and did you play with Mark Galkey? Is that how you found that? Is that how Mark knew you?
Well, Mark and I went to University of Portland at the same time, so that's how we knew each other. Yeah, he was an amazing trumpet player, an amazing band director as well. I didn't play in the same bands as Mark, although I subbed every once in a while. So, like with the Woody Height Band, I wasn't a regular member, but sometimes I would sub in that band. So, got to play under Mark's lead. Mark was a strong lead trumpet player.
You did play with the Mount Hood Kicks
Yep.
and Art Abrams Band.
Yep.
Any others that you played sax in?
Yeah, I was in the Chris Conrad Big Band. I was in the Walter Bridges Big Band. I was in the Jazz Express. I've done some subbing with the Vanport Jazz Orchestra, the Katarina New Big Band, the one that James Gregg directed. Now I can't remember the name of it. Shame on me, but yes, lots of big band experience through the years.
Was there ever a time when you're in one of these big bands, and if maybe you were backing someone, where you're actually nervous before you play the set?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Which is the most? Which one comes to mind?
I think maybe going into the studio and recording with Art Abrams. That might have been it. You know, when you record, it's like examining your playing under a microscope. You know, live, some mistakes and things can be forgiven, but when it's recorded, it's permanent and it's very exposed. So I was a little nervous about that one. You know, I'm surrounded by these great players and just wanting to do my best to make sure that the recording went well.
So you're at David Douglas, and what were you teaching at David Douglas?
In the beginning, it was orchestra again, 5 schools a day. A few years into it, Mark Galke went into administration, and when that happened, there was a big change at the high school. So I took over the jazz band at the high school. So I was teaching orchestra and jazz band at the high school.
So it's your first time doing jazz band since you were at the University of Portland.
Yeah, that's right.
That must have been fun.
It was. Yep, it was a lot of fun.
So how long were you at David Douglas?
I was at David Douglas for 8 years. It was a wonderful gig. I wouldn't have left except that the Mount Hood job came open, and that was my dream job. So I applied for that one and got it.
Yeah, and the person before you was Chris Bruyere, who is
Right.
an amazing director and now at Central Washington. So I would have felt maybe a little anxious going into Mount Hood Community College following Chris, and of course with the legacy that Larry Mcveigh still had, that must have been a little nerve-wracking.
A little bit. You know, expectations were still high, but that suited me fine. You know, that's what I wanted from students anyway. So, yeah, no, it was a good fit for me. I really enjoyed those years.
Well, it was a great fit, and I had a chance to listen to some of your bands while you're at Mount Hood Community College, and they were always phenomenal. And you won a few awards while at Mount Hood Community College.
So every year we would record a CD. I started taking the students into one of the best studios in town. We went to Falcon. And I felt that it was important to get them the most professional experience that I possibly could, because some of them were considering professional careers. So I wanted to mimic as best I could the kind of experiences that they would have out in the real world. So we went into Falcon. The engineer was Dennis Carter. The recordings were good. I sent them off to Danny Beher, who was with Seabreeze Records. He also had Walrus Music and Otter Distributors.
Right.
Seabreeze was his recording label, and he said, your band is good enough that I would put your CDs out on my label with a select few other college bands around the country. So so we started getting our records on Seabreeze. There were some other bands around the country that were doing the same. But yeah, that was a great experience.
And you won. You're nominated for a Grammy, the first round of Grammys.
First round, yep.
And also, was it you or the band that won an IAJE award for?
That was the band. It was the recording again. IAJE, for people who don't know, is now defunct, but it was International Association for Jazz Education. It was big. And they did CD reviews every year. And one year, ours was one of the top 10 college CDs in the country. And that includes universities. So that was a big deal. Yeah.
No, that's huge. Well, while you're at Mount Hood, of course, you had you gave the kids a lot of experience, like the recording studios, I think is invaluable. You also had a chance to do a lot of traveling.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one spot you went to was the Reno Jazz Festival. Was that almost on a yearly basis?
That was on a yearly basis until another opportunity came along, which I felt provided more experience for the students than the Reno Jazz Festival. Now it was the trips to Taiwan that we started taking. We couldn't afford to do both. So it was one or the other. So, yeah.
Well, Michael Sanchez writes a question, and he wanted you to tell one memorable band trip story of when you went to Reno.
Okay. So I did think of one. I have to be careful about this because, the students, when they're in college and they go to Reno, there's a lot of opportunity for them to get into trouble. So I won't tell one of those, but here's a good one. Here's a really good one. So one year we got down to Reno and we got there early enough that the students over 21 could go into the casinos and gamble. And so one of the students did, and he was playing the quarter machine and he won a $500 jackpot. Okay, so the next day, they went out again. One of the students won a $300 jackpot, and the same student who won the $500 jackpot before, and this time I saw him do it because we were waiting for dinner. I saw him win another $500. So now these guys are sitting on $1,300, and they're thinking, now we could be practical and we could use this for rent at home, or we could just throw a big party. So they rented a presidential suite at one of the casinos and threw a party for the band. Fortunately, I didn't know about it until it was over, and nothing bad happened. But that's what they did with the money that they won at the Reno Jazz Festival.
Yeah, money well spent, I'm sure. And you also talked about going to Taiwan, and you went to Taiwan a number of times with Mount Hood. So tell me a little bit about your experiences playing in Taiwan.
That was incredible too. So we became associated, or I guess you would say, with the Portland Kaohsiung Sister City Association. And every year, the association would send a delegation to Taiwan in celebration, usually of their Lantern Festival, which is part of the Chinese New Year cycle. And in return, the Kaohsiung would send a delegation for our Rose Festival. So that was the exchange. So we started getting to go there, and it was a sweet deal for us because all we had to do was come up with airfare. Once we stepped off the plane, everything was taken care of, and first class all the way. Wonderful hotels, incredible dining out. We would have a dinner with city council. We got to meet the mayor. We got to do any number of things. The performances, some of them might just be in a school or somewhere, but usually there was always one big performance, like an outdoor performance in front of 10,000 people. Wow. So yeah, and sometimes it was televised. That was quite the experience because we would go there and we didn't speak Chinese, and we were trying to do sound checks, and that sort of thing. So it was a great experience for the students to experience a real professional sound check and have to deal with language barriers at the same time.
And I'm sure that, again, the quality of your jazz bands were amazing, that the Taiwan people were really into your performances and loved having you there.
I think so, although the music was foreign to them. They're not big band listeners, so I think they enjoyed it because the quality was high, but it wasn't something that they were accustomed to. So we weren't the most popular band that would play there. One of their own pop stars would come out and sing with their band, and the crowd would go wild. Yeah.
And you also performed at the World Games one year.
Yes. We performed, well, two things. The first time that I went there, we performed at the opening ceremonies of the Taiwan Area Games. And what that means is, because of the relationship between China and Taiwan, Taiwan was not allowed to participate in the Olympics. So they had their own Olympics, essentially. Okay. So they had a great big stadium, and they had athletic events, and they had opening ceremonies and all that kind of stuff. So we did perform for that one. For the World Games, that was a bigger deal, and we didn't actually perform at the World Games. We got to attend the opening ceremonies, and we got to do other performances around the World Games. But the World Games are part of it's under the umbrella of the Olympics. So yeah. It would be the games that don't actually make it into the Olympics.
So you've had so many experiences from around the world, and this is going to be a hard question, but what was your most memorable jazz performance that you were in front of the band with as a conductor?
Oh boy. I think it was probably those Taiwan performances. In front of a crowd of 10,000 people, and the amount of professionalism that went into the production of those, I think that was probably it.
And now back with Mount Hood, you also had a great staff that you were working with for the entire performing arts staff, and one of them was Dave Vardoon.
Yes.
And Dave Vardoon, if you don't know who he is, tell us a little bit about who Dave Vardoon is, because he's really important with compositions.
Yeah. So actually, let me back up and say that when I first started teaching at Mount Hood, Larry Zagans was still there. Larry Zagans was the orchestra director. He's a symphonic bass player. He used to play with the Oregon Symphony, and he taught bass. And all of those incredible bass players that came through Mount Hood Community College studied with Larry Zagans. So I'm talking about Ben Wolf. I'm talking about Phil Baker. I'm talking about all those guys. He was responsible for that. So, and he was quite a character too. All those guys were bigger than life. Dave Vardoon was a writer. A number of his arrangements were performed by the Stan Kenton Orchestra, and he hooked up with a publishing company and published a ton of big band arrangements. And if you ever go to a contest anywhere in the country, you're going to hear a Dave Vardoon chart. It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they work.
Yeah. Yep.
I do have one question here from Cynthia Plank. We're talking about teaching. She says, looking back, what would you tell first-year teachers, and what would you tell young players who are considering a career in performance?
First-year teachers. Hang in there. It's really hard the first 3 years. I can remember my first year of teaching. I would come home in the afternoon. I would lay on the couch for an hour or two and just rest and recover, because it was so exhausting, but incredibly thrilling and rewarding at the same time. And I didn't feel like I was really hitting my stride until about my third year. So first year teachers, just know that it's going to be hard. Hang in there. It's going to get easier and better. Going into performance, it's a tough road. I would never tell anybody not to try, but just recognize that it will be challenging, and you may not be able to carve out a career in performance. It still might be something that you have to try anyway. Just because of who you are, you may have to try to carve out a career in performance.
So your career at Mount Hood, you retired a few years ago. Tell me a little bit why you retired at the time you did.
So the last few years of my teaching at Mount Hood, I'll just say that things got a little weird. So, and when those things got a little bit weird, I started attending board meetings at the college. And what I learned was that the board members were essentially being lied to by the staff and by the administration. And I was pretty horrified by that. And I thought, every school board should have somebody who comes from the inside because they know the right questions to ask. If you have only board members that are from the outside, they don't know enough to ask the right questions to know what's going on. So that was my decision to run for the board at Mount Hood and to be able to continue with that college to help it to be a great institution.
And that's one of the things that really impresses me about you, Susie, is that once you retired, it would have been really easy just to kind of wash your hands of things and go and do something else. But you're giving back to the community and back to the school. And I really think that you've made a difference in Mount Hood Community College, even after you retired.
I think I did. I was able to watch over things at a much higher level. A new president came in, which was very helpful. She was very supportive of the arts and of music. And I was just able to keep an eye on what was going on there. And if something looked not right, I could go to her and say, look, this is what's going on. We need to fix this.
Yeah, and I think now the college, the music program is in really good hands with Dan and Danielle Davey. And I know that it would not have been possible if the school would have had your backing.
Maybe that's true. And ditto, Dan and Danielle are doing a phenomenal job. They are just really hitting it out of the park.
Something else you've been doing lately is you bought some property down in San Salvador.
El Salvador.
El Salvador.
Yeah.
Thank you. So what brought you to buy a hostel in El Salvador?
So my daughter and I now jointly own a micro hotel or hostel right on the beach in El Salvador. It was kind of an impulsive thing that I did, but I'm really excited to work on this project. And of course, I love being at the beach. It's just gorgeous there. If anybody wants to go, just let me know and I'll hook you up. So our vision is that we wanted to, first of all, fix the place up. It was a little run down. And then we wanted to get it out there and try to bring in more international tourism and bring dollars to El Salvador and help them to develop their country. It's a third world country. It's very poor. So that was it. Leverage international tourism dollars and have them stay right in the country. And by staying in the country, I'm not going to take money off of this project. In fact, we are setting it up so that a portion of the income from the project will benefit some kind of a community need, some kind of a community project. It could be in healthcare, education, or something like that. Wow. And I was inspired by that by one time when I traveled to Peru, when we stayed in Cusco, I stayed in a hotel. It was owned by a Dutch company, a Dutch couple, and they were benefiting the local orphanage. On each of the rooms, room number 1, room number 2, room number 3, it was a picture and a name of a kid in the orphanage that benefited from that hotel. So that's kind of the vision.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And it's beautiful down there. Beautiful.
So I take it that you can go right off. Can you go swimming right off the beach there?
Right off the beach. The water is safe there. It's very unusual. It's a lava flow that goes right down into the ocean. At low tide, it creates tide pools, and you can just go out and snorkel. And at high tide, it's still safe. You can't really snorkel then, but the snorkeling at low tide is just amazing.
Well, it sounds fantastic, and if anybody wants to go on an adventure, I'd highly recommend talking to you, and you'll hook them up.
I'll hook them up. Yeah. I don't think you would want to travel to El Salvador by yourself the first time. You kind of need to have somebody help you figure out the transportation system and where to go and where not to go. But yeah, it's a great place to have an adventure.
What advice would you give your 25-year-old self now? 25,
let me think. So 25, I just started teaching. Let's rewind a little bit. And I would say that after I left Mount Hood Community College, what I think I should have done is go to one of the schools that some of the other guys went to, like North Texas, like some of those schools, because I felt like when they finished at North Texas, they knew a lot more than I did, the route that I chose. So I should have gone big, I should have just done it. So that advice.
That's great advice. And I've known some people that have gone through that program as well. And it's a great program.
Yeah. Well, North Texas and others, there are others as well. But I think that I became, when I first went to Mount Hood, I was a little fish in a big pond. And then my next step was a big fish in a little pond. And that's where my growth was stunted. I should have gone a little bit bigger and challenged myself a little bit more.
But you're talking about growth. One of the things that you did an amazing job with is that you started off teaching orchestra, 5 different schools per day. I'm sure that the only good thing about that, besides getting your feet wet, not attending faculty meetings, that's always the nice.
Yeah.
But you get a chance to progress, and you get better and better, and you started sharing those experiences with all your students.
Yeah. So you and I talked about this yesterday when we were sort of planning out this interview, and I wanted to say that although to each person his own, and they should do what's right for them, I thought in my career that some of the best moves that I made were changing, going from one district to another. So I had the perspective of 2 different school districts, then going to another level where I'm doing a community college, then going on the board at the community college, and now I'm on the board at the Multnomah Education Service District. With each move that I made, I took knowledge and experience with me, and I was able to apply it to the new situation while learning about the new system at the same time. So I felt like I was doubling my capacity and also bringing with me some stuff to share.
Mm-hmm.
This is what this other district is doing. Do you think we want to try this here? That sort of thing. I think that's how we grow, is by stepping out and changing every once in a while.
Well, exactly. And you're growing and you're making yourself more successful, but you're also making the programs or the things that you're working with successful.
That's right. That's right.
And that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, and I really appreciate your time here, Susie, but I have one last question.
Okay.
Alto sax or tenor sax? What do you like playing better?
Whichever one has the best read at the time.
That's always a good thing.
That's the truth. Now, I know more tunes on alto. I should know tunes on tenor as well, but I learned them in one key. That's bad. So I guess I'm more of an alto player than tenor, just because I play more alto than tenor. But there's nothing more pleasing than to play a saxophone that is set up so that the reed and the mouthpiece are working. So you're not fighting that.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate your time, and I hope that people are enjoying these conversations. Thanks.
I hope so too. This is a great thing that you're doing. I hope you continue.
Oh, thank you, Susie. I appreciate that. Take care.
All right. Okay. Bye.